What if I told you that a missile considered obsolete for over 30 years brought down a target that the most advanced systems in NATO had failed to reach for almost 2 years? And what if I told you that the engineers who pulled this off were not in a military lab or a defense facility, but inside a wooden shed in the middle of a forest with parts they had collected from 12 different abandoned Soviet bases somewhere in the forests of central Ukraine, far from any city, far from any visible road? There is a small wooden structure that no satellite ever flagged as important. From the outside, it looks like an old hunting cabin. The roof sags slightly in the middle. The paint on the walls peeled away years ago. A narrow dirt path leads to the door, mostly covered by fallen leaves and pine needles. If you walk past it, you would think no one had been there in decades. According to several reports that surfaced months later, that was the point. Inside that wooden shed, during the long months between the autumn of 2023 and the spring of 2024, a group of Ukrainian engineers worked under conditions that defense analysts in Washington and Brussels would later describe as almost impossible to believe. There was no climate control. There was no clean room. The lighting came from portable generators that hummed quietly in the background. Tools were laid out on wooden tables built from local timber. The men and women working there wore civilian clothes. Many had been university lecturers, retired technicians, or factory workers before the war began. Some had not touched a missile system in over 25 years. Their goal, according to accounts shared with international correspondents long after the operation, was simple to describe and almost impossible to execute. They wanted to take a Soviet missile system declared obsolete in the late 1980s, find every working part still scattered across abandoned bases throughout Ukraine, and rebuild it from scratch into something that could reach a target deep behind Russian lines. A target that, according to multiple Western intelligence summaries, had remained untouched since the first day of the full-scale invasion. The lead engineer, identified in available reports only by the first name Mykola, was reportedly 58 years old at the time. Before the war, he had taught electrical engineering at a small technical college near Cherkasy. His students remembered him as patient and quiet, the kind of teacher who explained things twice without being asked. According to one account published in a European defense journal, Mykola had been working on this project for almost 6 months before the first launch. He spent those months collecting parts, old guidance computers, fuel valves, fragments of warhead casings, stabilizer fins, cables, connectors. Every piece had to be cleaned, tested, and verified by hand. Some components were over 40 years old. Many had been sitting in damp warehouses since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The 12 abandoned bases that supplied these parts were spread across 5 different regions of Ukraine. Some had been completely forgotten by the time the team arrived. Doors hung off their hinges. Bird nests filled the corners. Mykola and his small team would drive to these locations in unmarked civilian vehicles, often at night, often in winter when the roads were empty. They carried the parts back, wrapped in old blankets, and stored them in the forest workshop in cardboard boxes labeled with handwritten codes that only the team understood. According to reports that emerged in the months following the operation, one of the most difficult challenges was the guidance system. The original Soviet electronics were designed in an era before modern satellite navigation. They were considered obsolete almost immediately after the Cold War ended. NATO experts who later studied what the Ukrainian team had done described it as something they had never seen before. The engineers had taken old analog circuits and connected them to modern commercial GPS modules that could be purchased online for less than $200 each. They wrote new firmware on laptops that ran on portable batteries. They tested the integration in the forest, sometimes by simulating launches against wooden poles set up at measured distances. There was a moment, according to one account, when the team almost gave up. Sometime in February of 2024, a guidance test failed 3 times in a row. Mykola sat on a wooden stool and said nothing for almost 10 minutes. Then, according to a younger engineer present that night, he stood up, walked to the corner of the shed, and started rewriting the code from the beginning. He worked through the night. By morning, the system passed every test. The target, according to public reporting, was a Russian command and logistics facility located far behind the front lines, in a region that Western missiles, including some of the most advanced systems supplied to Ukraine, had not been able to reach reliably during the first 2 years of the conflict. The distance was extreme. The terrain was difficult. Russian air defense coverage in the area was, according to multiple analysts, considered some of the densest in the entire theater of operations. Several attempts using more modern systems had reportedly fallen short, either intercepted along the way or affected by electronic countermeasures. The night of the launch was, by several accounts, unusually quiet. Temperatures in the forest dropped below -8 degrees Celsius. The team had moved the rebuilt missile system onto a flatbed trailer hidden under a tarp painted to match the surrounding pine trees. They drove slowly along a back road for almost 2 hours before reaching the launch site, a small clearing they had identified months earlier from old topographic maps. The launch sequence took less than 7 minutes from final preparation to ignition. The missile lifted off with a roar that the team described as both familiar and strange. Familiar because the sound matched what older engineers remembered from training exercises decades ago. Strange because no one had expected to hear it again. Here, in this forest, on this night. The trail of light disappeared into the dark sky almost instantly. The team stood in silence for several seconds. Then they began packing up the equipment. Reports of an impact reached open source analysts within 24 hours. Satellite imagery, later reviewed by independent researchers, appeared to show damage at a location that NATO experts had repeatedly described as effectively beyond reach. Russian sources offered no immediate official acknowledgement, but private discussions reportedly described it as deeply concerning. Western analysts who studied what had happened were, according to one published account, reluctant to believe at first that the missile responsible had been built in a wooden shed by a team that included a retired engineering professor and 3 former factory workers. In the weeks that followed, Mykola and his team disappeared back into the forest. According to one account, they were already working on the next system. The shed remained in place. The dirt path was still covered in pine needles. From the outside, nothing had changed. In the months that followed, defense analysts on both sides quietly studied what had happened in that forest. Some described it as a turning point. Others called it a single isolated success. What no one disputed was that a small team, working with parts older than most of them, had reached a place that the most expensive systems in modern warfare had not. The shed in the forest still stands today, according to recent reports. The story itself was almost lost in the noise of the war. If this analysis showed you a side of modern warfare that traditional news rarely covers, take a moment to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you do not miss the next investigation. Every week we examine operations and stories from the front lines that quietly shaped the war. Leave a comment below sharing what part stayed with you the most. The next operation we look at involves a single radio signal that changed how an entire region prepared for the days that followed.